What if paying rent wasn't about money, but about the one thing you can't put a price on: love? The rain had been steady all day, the kind that wasn't violent but unrelenting, droplets running down my hood, soaking into my jeans, and clinging to my shoes as though they refused to let go. By the time I climbed the narrow steps to the old brick townhouse I rented a room in, I was exhausted, weighed down by more than just the groceries in my arms. I paused at the door, dripping water onto the welcome mat, and that's when I noticed her. My landlady stood there in the dim hallway light, waiting as if she had known I'd arrive at this exact moment. She leaned against the doorframe with her arms crossed, not in anger, not in impatience, but in a way that made her look both composed and quietly tired. Her dark hair, loosely tied back, framed her face, and a strand had slipped free, brushing against her cheek. The faint smell of jasmine tea drifted from inside, mingling with the rain-soaked air I carried in. I swallowed hard, because I knew what awaited me. The conversation about rent. Her eyes, steady, deep, unreadable, met mine, and for a moment I forgot how wet and cold I was. She was in her early 40s, confident, graceful, the kind of presence that filled a room without raising her voice. Tonight, though, her expression was softer, less like the woman who reminded me each month of my obligations, and more like someone caught between duty and something else she didn't want to admit. "You're late," she said quietly, her tone not sharp, but carrying enough weight to make me feel as if I'd failed somehow. "I know," I muttered, shifting the grocery bags in my arms, embarrassed by my own disheveled state. The rain dripping from my jacket made a small puddle at my feet. Work kept me longer than I expected. Her gaze lingered, not accusing, but searching, almost as if she wanted to ask something beyond the ordinary. I lowered my head slightly, already rehearsing the words I dreaded. "I'm sorry about the rent. I just need more time." But she didn't speak of money. Not yet. Instead, she stepped aside, opening the door wider. "Come in before you freeze out there." The warmth of the hallway wrapped around me as I crossed the threshold, but her presence was warmer still. I set the bags on the small wooden table, feeling her eyes on me as I peeled off my damp jacket. My heart beat faster than it should have. Maybe it was the stress of rent hanging over me. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, confident, calm, with a touch of weariness that made me want to ease it away somehow. In that moment, standing in the quiet of her home, rain pattering softly against the windows, I realized the tension wasn't just about money. It was about her, about me, about the unspoken current that had been building, waiting for the night when silence would finally give way to words neither of us were ready for. The kitchen was warm, far warmer than the damp night air that clung to my skin when I stepped inside. A small lamp above the counter cast a golden glow across the room, softening the lines of the old cabinets and giving the place a lived-in, familiar charm. I had eaten here before, once or twice when she had insisted I shouldn't survive on takeout alone, but tonight felt different. She moved gracefully around the kitchen, her sweater loose, the sleeves pushed up to her elbows as she set out two simple plates. Nothing extravagant. Roasted vegetables, rice, and chicken seasoned with herbs that filled the air with a comforting fragrance. I stood awkwardly at the edge of the room for a moment, until she looked over her shoulder and gestured toward the chair across from hers. "Sit. You'll catch a cold if you don't eat something warm." Her tone carried that mix of practicality and quiet care I'd come to recognize. Firm, but not unkind. I obeyed, slipping into the wooden chair, listening to the clink of cutlery and the soft simmer of the kettle on the stove. When she finally joined me at the table, a glass of wine in her hand, I noticed the way the sweater had slipped slightly off her shoulder, revealing the smooth line of her collarbone. She didn't seem to notice, or maybe she did, and chose not to fix it. Either way, I looked away too quickly, hoping she hadn't caught me staring. We ate in comfortable silence at first, the kind where words weren't necessary. The rain tapping against the kitchen window was like background music, steady and calming. Every now and then, she glanced at me, and each glance felt deliberate, though she masked it behind casual questions. "How's work?" she asked, her fort pausing midair. I shrugged. "Busy, demanding, but steady." Her lips curved slightly, almost into a smile. Steady is good, even if it doesn't feel that way. I nodded, appreciating her perspective more than I could explain. She always had a way of making simple words feel weighted, as if she understood more than she let on. It was midway through the meal, after a sip of her wine, that she leaned back in her chair and let out a breath I didn't expect. Her eyes held mine, steady, serious, but softened by something unspoken. Forget the rent tonight. For a moment, I froze, fork suspended above my plate. I blinked, certain I had misheard, but she repeated herself with a calmness that carried both authority and gentleness. Forget it. Just tonight, don't think about it. Her words hung in the air between us, heavier than anything else she could have said. I felt relief first, an almost physical unburdening, but beneath it confusion. Why tonight? Why this sudden release, when I had been preparing myself for the disappointment in her eyes? I studied her face. She wasn't teasing, wasn't playing some cruel trick. If anything, she looked tired, like someone who had decided that kindness mattered more than numbers on a ledger. I opened my mouth to thank her, but the words tangled on my tongue. Gratitude felt too small for what she had just given me. And maybe, deep down, it wasn't just generosity. Maybe it was something else. The wine glass in her hand caught the light as she lifted it, her eyes never leaving mine. And in that moment, I couldn't help but feel that she wasn't just telling me to forget the rent. She was inviting me into something unspoken, something far more dangerous and far more meaningful. The air between us had shifted. It wasn't the food, nor the wine, nor even the storm outside. It was the words she had spoken so casually, yet so heavily. Forget the rent tonight. I sat there, fork untouched, try to decide whether to accept her kindness as simple generosity or to admit the part of me that sensed something deeper behind it. Her eyes lingered on me for just a beat longer than necessary before she turned her attention back to her plate, as though retreating from the weight of what she had just said. I cleared my throat, searching for something to anchor the moment, but my voice came out softer, more deliberate than I intended. I'll pay in other ways. The words slipped out before I could stop them. They weren't rehearsed, weren't even logical, but they were true, carrying a quiet conviction I hadn't planned to reveal. Her hand, mid-reach for her wine glass, paused. The clink of glass against the table seemed louder than usual when she finally lifted it. She sipped slowly, her lips brushing the rim, eyes refusing to meet mine. But her silence said more than any protest could. I let the stillness stretch. My chest tightened, waiting, half afraid she would laugh, half afraid she wouldn't. When her gaze finally lifted, it wasn't sharp. It was uncertain, curious, vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen before. "And what does that mean?" she asked, her tone light, but her voice caught on the last word as though it carried more weight than she wanted it to. I leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the wooden table, closing some of the distance between us. I mean, I don't want to be another tenant who just hands over money and disappears behind a closed door. If there are ways I can ease the weight you carry, even small ones, I want to, whether it's fixing something, keeping you company, or simply listening. Her fingers traced the stem of her glass slowly, nervously. A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, but it was guarded, the kind that hides more than it reveals. "You're too young to understand the kind of weight I carry," she said softly, shaking her head. But her eyes betrayed her words. They shimmered with something else, something that looked a lot like longing. I didn't press further. Instead, I reached across the table, not to grab her hand, but to slide her glass a little closer when she set it down. The motion was casual enough to pass as nothing, but my fingertips brushed against hers in the process. Her skin was warm, soft, and she didn't pull away. Not immediately. For a heartbeat, her fingers rested under mine, and in that small contact, 1,000 unsaid things passed between us. She finally withdrew her hand, slowly, as though part of her didn't want to. Her lips parted, but no words followed. Instead, she looked down at her plate, pushing food around without taking a bite. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was charged. It was heavy. Every creak of the old house, every raindrop against the glass, seemed amplified, as though the universe itself was listening in on something fragile and forbidden. And in that silence, one truth crystallized for both of us. Nothing about this night would ever be ordinary again. The plates were nearly empty, though neither of us had eaten much. Conversation had slowed into silence, the kind that wasn't uncomfortable, but too fragile to break carelessly. I could feel her watching me in quiet intervals, as though measuring the weight of her own thoughts before deciding whether to share them. She set her fork down gently and leaned back in her chair. The lamplight painted soft shadows across her face, highlighting the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, marks of a woman who had lived, endured, and carried more than she would ever admit out loud. "You remind me of someone," she said finally, her voice so quiet I almost missed it under the rain still pattering outside. I tilted my head. "Who?" She hesitated, fingers tracing the rim of her wineglass in small circles. "My husband. Not in how you look, but in the way you listen." He had that same stillness about him. The world could be crumbling, and he'd sit there, steady, as though just being present was enough. Her voice wavered slightly at the word husband, and for the first time since I'd known her, I saw her composure slip. The confident, self-assured woman who managed her property and kept her life neatly ordered looked suddenly fragile, almost like a stranger wearing her face. "He passed away years ago," she continued, eyes fixed on her glass. "And for a long time, I told myself I didn't need anyone, that I could stand on my own. And I have." But she stopped, biting her lip as though the next words were too risky. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table, careful not to push too hard, careful to simply be there. But her eyes flicked up to mine, and for the briefest moment, the mask she wore every day fell away. "But some nights are quieter than others. Too quiet. You know." I nodded slowly because I did know. Loneliness doesn't always roar. It often whispers, gnaws, lingers in the small hours when there's nothing to distract you. She folded her hands together on the table, and I noticed how tightly she pressed them, as if she feared they might betray her trembling. "I didn't mean to burden you," she added quickly, her voice regaining a touch of its usual steadiness. "You're young. You should be living your life, not listening to a woman talk about the ghosts in hers." I shook my head. "You're not a burden. You've never been. If anything, you've given me more than you realize. A place to stay, kindness when I didn't deserve it. Let me give something back, even if it's just listening." Her eyes softened, and for a moment, she looked at me not as a tenant, not as a younger man, but simply as someone who had earned a place in the hidden corner of her heart. The kettle on the stove let out a soft hiss, as if reminding us the world still existed outside this fragile moment. But neither of us moved. In that silence, thick with vulnerability, I realized something. She didn't need grand gestures, promises, or declarations. What she needed was simple, someone to see her, truly see her, when the rest of the world had long stopped looking. When the plates were cleared and the wine sat nearly forgotten between us, the house seemed to fall into a hush. The rain had softened to a drizzle, tapping lightly against the window pane as if keeping time with our silence. She rose from her chair first, gathering the dishes with practiced ease. I moved to help, instinct more than anything else, but when I reached for the plates, her hand brushed against mine. It should have been nothing, a passing accident, a shared task, but the moment her skin met mine, everything slowed. Her hand was warm, delicate yet steady, and I didn't withdraw. Instead, I let my fingers press lightly over hers, steadying the plate she carried. Her breath caught, audible even in the quiet kitchen. For half a heartbeat, she looked at me, truly looked at me, not as the young tenant who struggled to keep up with rent, but as the man sitting across from her tonight. The plate between us became irrelevant. My hand covered hers fully now, not gripping, not demanding, but anchoring. Her lips parted slightly, as if words had formed but refused to leave her. The lamplight cast a soft glow on her face, and I could see every flicker of hesitation in her eyes. Hesitation battling with something deeper, something she couldn't hide. vulnerability, desire, fear, all tangled together. Slowly, carefully, I eased the plate from her hand and set it down on the counter. My hand lingered, though, still resting on hers. I felt the faint tremor in her fingers, the quiet hum of tension traveling from her skin into mine. She didn't move. She didn't pull away. Instead, her gaze fell to where our hands met, as though acknowledging what we both already knew. This touch wasn't casual. It wasn't about dishes or helping. It was about her, about me, about everything unspoken simmering just below the surface. When she finally exhaled, it was slow, uneven. "You shouldn't," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but her hand didn't withdraw. "Maybe," I murmured back, my voice low, steady, "but I want to." Her eyes flicked up to mine, then, searching, questioning, almost pleading with me to take back the words. But I didn't. I couldn't. The space between us felt smaller than ever. The rain outside, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint hiss of the cooling kettle, all of it faded into the background. There was only her hand beneath mine, the pulse of her heartbeat quickening in her wrist, the weight of her silence pressing against my chest. Finally, she let her fingers turn, just slightly, until her palm rested against mine. It wasn't bold. It wasn't dramatic. But it was real. A simple, quiet acceptance. The kind of touch that said more than a dozen conversations could. I squeezed her hand gently, and she let me. And though nothing else happened, no embrace, no kiss, that single connection carried the promise of everything waiting just beyond our hesitation. It wasn't passion that defined that moment. It was tenderness. And somehow, that was even more dangerous. Her hand in mine felt steady, but her eyes betrayed her. I could see the storm of thoughts swirling behind them. The pull toward me, the push away, the endless loop of should I, shouldn't I. And then, as if the weight became too much, she pulled back. Slowly, deliberately, her hand slipped free from mine, leaving behind the faint ghost of warmth on my skin. The absence of her touch was sharper than the contact itself, like cold air rushing in where fire had just been. She stepped toward the sink, plates in her hands, though I knew she wasn't thinking about dishes anymore. She stood there with her back to me, shoulders tense, staring out the window into the rain-slick street. "You're too young," she said softly. The words weren't harsh, but they carried the heaviness of a truth she wanted to cling to. This isn't right. Her reflection in the glass looked smaller somehow, more fragile than the confident woman I knew. She hugged her arms around herself, as if trying to build a barrier I couldn't cross. I sat there, watching her, torn between respecting her retreat and refusing to let the moment dissolve into something unspoken and unfinished. My hands clenched and unclenched against the table, the wood cool under my palms, grounding me. Finally, I found my voice, steady but gentle. "Maybe it's not about right or wrong," I said. "Maybe it's about what feels true." She let out a soft, broken laugh, part disbelief, part pain. "True doesn't matter when the world will see as wrong. They'll look at me and wonder what I'm doing. They'll look at you and think you don't know any better." I rose from my chair slowly, not closing the distance between us, but standing tall enough to make sure my words carried. "I don't care what they think. I know what I feel when I'm here. With you." Her shoulders tensed at that, and I saw her fingers tighten around the edge of the sink. Silence stretched long, broken only by the faint patter of rain easing against the glass. For a moment, I thought she might turn, close the distance, let herself believe me. But she didn't. She stayed there, staring into the dark street, as if it held the answers she couldn't find in me. I didn't push. I couldn't. This wasn't a battle to win. It was a hesitation she had to walk through herself. So I stayed behind her, close enough that my presence filled the space, but far enough to let her breathe. The kitchen felt charged, the kind of tension that makes your chest ache. My heart beat hard in my ribs, every second a reminder of what I wanted but couldn't take. She finally exhaled, long and heavy, and whispered, "You should go." It wasn't rejection. It wasn't anger. It was fear, plain and raw. And yet, even as I reached for my jacket and prepared to step into the cool night, I knew something important had shifted. She wasn't pushing me away because she didn't feel it. She was pushing me away because she did. That, more than anything, gave me hope. The night air was cool when I stepped into the hallway, jacket draped over my arm, shoes squeaking faintly against the worn wooden floor. For a moment, I thought that was how it would end. Me walking out into the drizzle, leaving behind the warmth of her kitchen and the unspoken tension that still clung to every corner of the house. But then I heard her footsteps behind me. Slow, hesitant, not the confident stride she usually carried, but something softer, uncertain. I turned, and there she was, standing in the doorway of the kitchen, arms folded loosely across her chest, her expression unreadable in the low light. She studied me for a long moment, as though weighing one final choice. "Wait," she said quietly. Just one word, but froze me in place. I set my jacket down, my pulse quickening. She took a step closer, then another, until she was only an arm's length away. Her eyes lifted to mine, and for the first time that night, she didn't look guarded. She looked open, vulnerable. Before I could speak, she moved forward, slipping her arms around my waist. The embrace was gentle, hesitant at first, but when I instinctively held her in return, she let herself sink fully against me. Her cheek rested against my chest, her breath warm through the fabric of my shirt. I could feel the steady rhythm of her heartbeat, faster than usual, but steadying as I tightened my arms around her. I lowered my chin lightly, resting it against her hair, inhaling the faint scent of jasmine that always seemed to follow her. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. The silence wasn't tense anymore. It was peaceful, complete. When she finally spoke, her voice was muffled against my chest. "I don't know where this will go. I don't know if it even should." I smoothed a hand gently across her back, not pressing, just tracing the comforting line of her spine. "We don't have to know. Not tonight." She exhaled softly, and I felt the last of her resistance slip away. Her arms tightened just a little more, as though she feared that letting go might mean losing the moment forever. "I was afraid," she admitted, her voice so quiet I almost missed it. "Afraid of being judged, of being foolish, of wanting something I shouldn't." I pulled back just enough to look at her, my hands resting gently at her sides. "You're not foolish. And whatever people think, it doesn't matter to me. What matters is right here, right now." Her eyes glistened in the dim hallway light, and for the first time that night, a small, genuine smile curved her lips. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The street beyond the window glistened under the glow of the street lamps, fresh and quiet, like the world itself was waiting for us to begin something new. I leaned closer, pressing a soft kiss against her forehead. Nothing more, nothing less. Just a promise, sealed in the gentlest way possible. And as she rested her head back against me, arms still around my waist, I realized this wasn't about rent or favors or even age. It was about connection, about two lonely hearts choosing warmth, even when the world might never understand. And for tonight, that was enough. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who loves slow burn romance, and subscribe for more heartfelt age gap love stories. Your support helps bring these stories to life.